We ready to go? Okay, so if modernism, let's define modernism or enlightenment. Remember what? Let's just recap. Let's all make this a little bit more collaborative tonight. So the Enlightenment and modernism typified what chief characteristics did we have from the Enlightenment and modernism? Come on. It's like you're in church on Sunday. Come on. Rationalism.
I was pretty there.
Right? Rationalism, scientific method, truth, empirical validity. That was the movement of modernism. You had Nietzsche, which basically turned the world kind of into a closed system.
What's imperialism?
Empirical, to verify. You know, it's empirically it's provable. And so that turned the world kind of into a closed system. And so you see that theologically, the Christian church kind of started to retreat into areas where, you know, pre-modernism, we would say that, remember, we had the explanations for things we didn't understand, we would just, and we just assign it to God, right? And so why does the sun rise every day? Well, why? Because God makes the sun rise every day. Well, along comes Copernicus and the Copernican revolution. You'd see that, well, it's not necessarily a divine miracle. Well, I mean, by faith, it's a divine miracle, you know, but do you get my point? It's because of the way the earth rotates and its position in the sun. And so you'd see, rationalism would say that, guys, see, that wasn't God. It's just the universe. It's just nature. Oh, it's not God that makes the tree grow. No, it's, a process of photosynthesis and all these sorts of things. And so what that sort of did is it sort of sucked, no pun intended, sort of sucked the sap out of theology. And so theology really had nowhere else to go if you can't say that, God made the sunrise and God made the tree grow and all these things that primitive people did not understand about science, they assigned to God. Are you tracking with me? Yeah. Now that we have modernism and the Enlightenment, we know that it's the laws of science. It's the laws of nature. It wasn't necessarily a divine miracle. Well, where does theology go with that? It retreats into what Friedrich Schleiermacher called the feelings of the heart of absolute dependence. That this is basically the only spot, consciousness, feeling of God that science can't necessarily touch. And so the universe started to turn into a closed system, so to speak. Right? And this is what Christianity started to defer to, was like our founding fathers of the United States were deists. Therefore, yes, we have the laws of nature. And primitive people that didn't understand the laws of nature assigned all these things to God. And so do you know the gaps where we have scientific understanding, we just put God in those gaps where we don't understand? And this is where your rationalist and your empiricist, your materialist today would say, hey, you still are doing the God of the gap. Science, there's things that science can't explain, like I talked about consciousness last week. Well, they'll say, give science another 50 years, another 100 years, we'll explain it. We just need time. So inevitably, science will have the capacity to explain everything, which means the universe is a closed system. What do you mean by, what is a closed system? What does that mean? It means that there is no outside interference. It's a closed system that functions on law.
We've got the moon, the sun, that's outside of our planet.
They would say the universe is a closed system. Yes, it's all closed. And in many ways, in a sense, Mike, they're almost like crypto-Calvinists. Well, think about this. Calvin is known for his doctrine of predestination. That's everything that's predestined. What's your joke about Calvin? The joke about the Calvinist.
Yeah, the Calvinist fell down the stairs and said, thank God that's over.
Because everything's predestined, right? And he's like, whew, thank God that's over with. The materialists kind of function the same way, because if there is no God and the universe is a closed system, then in essence, Isabella and I were talking about this before class, then in essence, guys, you're just a product of your DNA, you're a product of your hereditary, you're a product of your psychological state, you're a product of evolution, and in many ways, you don't have a choice on the things that you do. It's just the makeup of your your DNA, your body, your cellular structure that makes you do the things you do. In a sense, that's why they're crypto-Calvinists. There is no such thing as free will. Richard Dawkins, famed atheist, would say there is no such thing as free will because you're merely dancing to your DNA. You don't have any choice. If there's nothing outside of us and the universe is closed, then you are merely a product. You're a meat suit, and you're just a product of evolutionary processes that are happening within your body. And so now you have people on the heels of the Enlightenment. You have the counter-Enlightenment that begins to develop with a Nietzsche, right? And what did Nietzsche say? God is dead, and therefore there is an absence. Because with the Enlightenment, they didn't discount God. Go read our founding fathers of the United States. God's everywhere in the documents, but it's a deistic God. You see what I'm saying? Who gives us the laws of nature. God gave us the law of nature, the law of ethics, or the laws of morality. And that's where religion basically retreated into, was morality. And this is where you start to spring up at the beginning of the 20th century into the 19th century social gospel movements. Because you can't say crazy supernatural stuff like resurrection from the dead, and you can't say crazy supernatural stuff like walking on water anymore because we know that's scientifically impossible. So what good is in there for it? Well, it takes to live a good and proper ethical life. Go read sermons from the 19th and the 20th century in almost all pulpits, and you'll see place that God instructions on how to live, and not about a supernatural event that took place where God sent his son, born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, died a death on the cross, the sin of humanity, and rose again supernaturally, miraculously from the dead as the conquering king of all that is evil, of all sin and death and evil. That's ruled out, and it's ruled out by the laws of nature, by the Enlightenment. But so people, please, Doc. Yeah. In Luther's day, can I caveat that? In Luther's day, I don't know if it's an A or an I there. Ars moriendi. It's called the art of dying. And before Luther, basically the priest's job was to come and do a checklist with you to caveat you and to say, okay, when was your last confession? How many times have you taken communion? And you go through this sort of checklist to make sure that you're ready to die. And people's greatest fear in medieval times was dying before you were prepared to die. Now you have people that say, I don't want to prepare to die. I wish I could just die in my sleep. They want to die quickly and without even knowing. Back then they hated that. They wanted to make sure they were prepared, that they were right with God, that everything was squared away. And that was ars moriendi. Luther flips ars moriendi, and basically, instead of a doctrinal checklist to say, did you? Are you okay? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And he brought the pastors to come, the art of dying, and to come to those who are near death and say, and not to ask how much you've done, but to proclaim what Jesus Christ has done for you. Different. To go to the person who's sick and dying and say, hey, Christ is risen, and you will be too. You trust in the good man now. And he's promised that where he is, you shall be also. He's made a promise. And when he makes a promise, he does not renege on his promises. And he's been raised from the dead and lives and reigns eternally. And we know his promises are most certainly true. Now you trust that. And you don't even have to have the faith to trust it. He'll give you the faith. He'll supply it. No one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So don't even worry about your level of faith. You just trust him.
What if you've had an awful life? Everything's yucky. Are you told that things will be better?
Well, certainly. You mean like Jesus. Jesus had a horrible life. I mean, think of today's standards. Jesus Christ is constantly walking around weeping. He's derided, and I said this a couple weeks ago, right? Think it's the worst form of tragedy imaginable to the human mind. You have a man who's born in obscurity, who's born in poverty, and the minute he's born, you have the political leadership trying to kill him. The minute he's born. And killing children that were even in the city where he was born so they could kill him. And he lives a life of suffering. His home city and home church tries to kill him when he starts his public ministry. This is Jesus now. His church abandons him. His friends abandon him. His family doesn't believe in him. Go read Mark 3, Mark 6, and John 7. And he dies rejected by his church, rejected by his family, rejected by his country, rejected by the world, rejected by the Romans, naked in front of the whole world, and with his mom looking on. It's as horrific gets. And see, this is how the gospel works. Look, you would look at that with human eyes and say, there's nothing good that can come in this. This is horrible, horrible, awful, what a letdown. And you would have no idea that God was doing the greatest possible, amazing, love-centered, miraculous, victorious thing that he will ever do. And you wouldn't see it. So, that's why Jesus Christ says, and those who follow me, those who lose their life for my sake will find it. You hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. So, what does the Apostle Paul say about suffering in this life? It's not even worth talking about compared to the eternal weight of glory, which will be ours. Even who was it? Teresa of Avila. Have you heard of that saint, Teresa of Avila? She wrote a little book called Seven-Story Castle. She was a pretty mystical nun. But what she said, she goes, when we reach heaven, even the worst possible day that any human could go through on earth, she says, when we are with the Lord in eternity, will only seem like a short night's sleep at a bad hotel. Huh? Hotel is my addition to it. But you get, will just seem like a short night's sleep from a bad day. That's it. So that's the promise of the gospel. But so Nietzsche comes along and he says, now that God is dead, his question was this: what next? Now that the universe is closed, there is no God, there is no morality, there is no right, there is no wrong. What next? Now, he wasn't in favor of anarchy. He just says this could, remember like we read his section from where he talked about the madman, right? He said he wasn't in favor of anarchy. He thought we could construct our own morals with God being dead, our own ethical system of right and wrong and the good. But he said if you don't, check it out. Western civilization, all of civilization, he says, has lived with the foundation that there is a God undergirding all civilization, correct? That's how, go read C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man. It's very interesting. Lewis studied moral codes from different cultures all over the world from all different times. And you would think, well, the Amazons would have a different morality than the Egyptians, and the Egyptians would have a different morality than the Babylonians because they're different people in different times. What he found was striking is that they were all basically the same. And so what does that tell you? There's something that's above them that's supplying a conscience of morality. And so Nietzsche said, when you pull the foundation out underneath a culture and a society, when you deconstruct it, pull the foundation out from underneath it, he says it may hover for a little bit, sort of like Wile E. Coyote when he steps off the cliff. You know what I mean? He steps out and he goes, looks around, right? And then what happens? Bang! That's what Nietzsche said is going to happen to society when you pull the God foundation away. It may hang in the air for a couple of seconds, and then it's going to crash if it's not replaced with something else. And he predicted that it would not be replaced with anything else when you pull the God foundation out from underneath culture. And he predicted, as I told you last night, that had to be God working through him I don't even know how I could say that sentence, but it's a weird sentence to say, that he predicted the 20th century would be the bloodiest one in the history of humanity by a factor of 1,000,000. And he was exactly right. And he said, when there is no moral foundation anymore, and there's nothing above us, summarized beautifully by that heretic John Lennon. We all like to listen to that song and turn it on the radio as we're driving around when it's sunny out. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us. Imagine he's a Nietzschean. Imagine all the people living in the world today, living together for just common good. That was Nietzsche's vision. You may say, I'm a dreamer, he says.
You just live and then you die.
Yeah, you're fertilizer. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. No, you're not the only one. Nietzsche was a nihilist too. You have him in your company, John Lennon. You have lots of nihilists. Then he says, imagine there's no country, right? Nothing to kill or die for, a brotherhood of man. This is Nietzscheism. This is nihilism. And we sing it and we look at the trees and oh, it's so sweet. It's hellacious. It's absolutely nothingism. It's horrific. I had a lady in my church this is my last church, whose sister was not a believer. And she was very militant about raising her kids not to be Christian. And this was early on when I was a pastor, and what happened was they had a cousin that was a playmate of, and the cousin passed away, a young little boy, died of cancer. And the mom, the kid, who was like 8 years old, was really despondent and hurt and crying, and the mother consoled him. She's not a believer. Here's how she consoled him. She said, well, Eric's gone, and he's in the ground now, or and he will become part of the ground, and he'll become part of the earth, which will eventually, grow trees. Like, this is Forrest Gump theology, right? Which will grow a tree where Jenny could be a bird and sit on the tree, and he'll be essentially fertilizer for the tree, and like that. And the kid started crying even more. He's like, I don't want my friend to be fertilizer. This is Lion King theology as well as Forrest Gump, right? It's the circle of life, right? The wolf eats the hyena, or the lion eats the hyena. The lion takes a dump, poops out the hyena. It fertilizes the grass. And well, guess what happens? The hyenas eat the grass, and then the lions eat the hyena, and then it's the circle of life. How does that sound? I mean, it works well for a song by Elton John, but this is nihilism. And this is and we could nice it up with the da 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 da. You could nice it up with musical notes that give you goosebumps. It's still nihilism, and it's still horrific. And if you're a nihilist, like these people purport to be, why do you feel like you have to make it nice? Just let it be what it is, right? If there is no God, why do you have such a strong visceral reaction against it? If it's good and this is the way the world is, why do we hate it? And I tap on Forrest Gump, but I think. Do you remember he's at the grave of his wife, Jenny? You remember have you guys all seen the movie Forrest Gump? Yes. He's at her grave after she dies, presumably I think of AIDS, because it was in the early 80s. And remember, she says, I have a rare disease that they don't really know what it is yet. And she was a drug user and you don't know that, but you just, I guess, assume it. And he's talking to her grave and he says, Jenny, he goes, I don't know if, Lieutenant Dan is right, where it's just nothing after we die, essentially. Or he says, and I don't know if Mama is right, because Mama just said, dying's a part of living. And he looks at her grave, that death is just a part of life. And then he says this, in a way that's almost so beautiful of naive, childlike faith that Jesus talks about. He says that death is just a part of life, and he goes, I sure wish that it wasn't. Even the people who purport nihilism, why do they wish that it wasn't? Why do we have to nice it up? It's not nice. The little boy's visceral reaction to his cousin becoming fertilizer is correct. Why do we have to make it nice if it's just a part of life? Why are we, if we're a part of a closed system in the universe, why do we rebel so hard against the natural processes in the universe? You ever think about that? Do you want to know what Richard Dawkins says? He's an atheist. He says, because human beings' conscience, this visceral reaction against death and against wrong, he says it's a virus that's been put on the hardware of the human computer that must be expunged. Which is why I appreciate Nietzsche, because he says, it's time to embrace the horror. He didn't make nihilism nice. He didn't say, well, we get to become, you get to become lion poop. As bad as that sounds, he didn't try and make it nice. He just says, it's horror. All bets are off. Everything sucks. That's why it's called nihilism and nothingism, who actually embraces the consequences of atheism. I appreciate that. Embrace that everything is horrific and there's no hope and there's no savior. That's nihilism. That's what jumps into the breach between the Enlightenment and what we have here. Postmodernism. They're birthed by Nietzsche. I'll be quick with these guys. You see this sheet? Because I want to get into this. Look at the 8 characteristics of postmodernism. So guys, check it out. So if like Luther, Aquinas, if they were pre-modern, Luther was kind of going into the modern sense, but if they're pre-modern and the Enlightenment's modern, what is postmodern? It's a rejection of everything that the Enlightenment stood for. It's the rejection of truth. It's the rejection of empiricism. And it's weird, postmodernists, like Nietzsche in a sense, would say that science and religion, we talked about this last week, didn't we? Science and religion are essentially the same thing because they're both after truth and they're both after like meaning and purpose. Science and religion are both to be rejected. And so what is left? True nothingism. So look at these key facets of postmodernism here. Number 1, there is no objective view of reality. What does objective mean? Truthful view. There is no truthful view. Remember what Nietzsche said? There are no such thing as facts. What are there? Interpretations. There's only interpretations of comes from your culture. You may say you have Christian values. You don't. They just come from your parents, that came from their parents, that came from their parents, that came from their parents, which came at some point from the culture that they lived in. You are culturally determined. You are not you. There is no objective reality or morality. And so they would say we cannot judge another culture, which is a cultural determination, but that's a whole other point. There's Nietzsche. There are no facts, only interpretations. Number 4, history is fiction. History is written from the perspective of culture, race, and gender of the winner, it should say there. Or of the writer. That works too. What is historic is totally subjective. And the modernists began to gain ascendancy in the 60s. A lot of bad stuff began to develop outside of the civil rights movement, which was super good. But I'm talking in Europe in the 60s. Writers like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, those two are the chief tricksters, I would say, postmodernists. Number 5, knowledge is power. We ought to be suspicious of anyone who claims to give us truth. They are out to further their own and their group's vested interests. So one of the things I would say is that the postmodernists were all suspicious of this. Have you heard this term before, you guys? Meta-narratives. Well, you know what a narrative is. What's a meta? Something that's alongside of it that explains the world. So what would be, God created the world would be a meta-narrative. Right? How about this? This would be a meta-narrative. We hold these truths to be self-evident. What? That all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. chiefly of which life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Notice, I love that they don't say the granting of happiness, the pursuit, right? This is called equality of outcome, equality of opportunity. That's what they're for, equality of opportunity. The postmodernists would say that's a meta-narrative. It is not to be trusted. Let's keep going. Number 6, ethical claims are mere sentiment. There are no neutral grounds to condemn the Holocaust. That's Richard Rorty. He would be an American version. He's an American postmodernist. There's no such thing as ethics. Number 7, deconstruction is justice. We have to explore and find contradictions in every piece of literature so that we can uphold justice and avoid injustice. Jacques Derrida. He primarily was involved in deconstruction of all meta-narratives. What does it mean to deconstruct? To tear down. Right? So there is no God, there is no truth, and so their job is to tear down these meta-narratives. Tear down the foundations of Western society, Western culture. That's what the postmodernists, that's the game that they're after, is to tear all this down. Tear the philosophical foundations of Western culture. You'll find this all over the place in schools, man. You know, not to critique it for its betterment, but to get rid of it. Because you know what I'll get to it in a second. Number 8, whoever spins best wins. Since there's no objective truth, all we have is rhetoric. Whoever plays the game best wins. Make sure it's you. So that chart below, look at. So if metaphysics, pre-modernism is realism, supernaturalism, modernism goes to naturalism, postmodernism is anti-realism. Look at human nature. Before the Enlightenment, original sin, subject to God's will. Modernism, the blank slate, tabula rasa, and autonomy. Postmodernism, social construction and conflict. Go down to political economics. Pre-modernism is feudalism. Modernism, Enlightenment, liberal capitalism. Postmodernism, socialism, which is one of the interesting things that they've sort of hitched their wagon to. They've married up with a Marxist ideology. And so the postmodernists would claim that, here's their view of history, you guys, that since there is no God, there is no right and wrong, there is no culture, there is no such thing as objective reality. All you have, all the way down to the bottom with interactions of people, is just power grabs. It's all about which comes straight from the pen of Marx, and what was Marx's chief basic economic conflict, right? There's the rich, there's the bourgeoisie, there's the proletariat. Right? You tracking with me? Hello? Well, that's all he said, that history is comprised of groups. There's the haves and there's the have-nots. And the haves are always exploiting the have-nots. And that's the thesis of Marxism. The Leninists pick up on this stuff at the end of the 19th century, implement it. And they implement this in what we now know as the Soviet Union. And what begins to happen is, inherently, what is their philosophy, the Marxists? It's atheistic, inherently, right? They're a product of Nietzsche and the forerunners of the postmodern movement. It's atheistic, and everything is about power. And it's the wealthy against the poor. And like I said last week, when you take groups of people and you pit them against one another, there's never been an instance in history when you pit people against one another like that, based on their group identity, there's not one instance in history where it doesn't end in murder. You can see why. When you tribalize people, don't be surprised when the tribes go to war. Because the other is always evil, right? So you're not an individual. You're a product of a group. That's how the Marxists see it. That's how the postmodernists see it. You are not an individual who has certain individual characteristics and traits and loves and dislikes. you are a part of either you're the victim of the cult, of the victim of the oppressor, or you're the damn oppressor itself, and you better watch out because we're coming for you. You're one or the other. So you know what happened? I'll give you an example. You want to see this philosophy in action? Here it is. So the Leninists implement this, and they go into the Ukraine. And, the Ukraine was the Soviet Union, which is why they're fighting today, because Putin still, he's an old KGB guy, and he thinks that's the Soviet Union. Like, it's not necessarily a war of one country against another. It's like, this would be our Texas. We want Texas back. In the early 20th century, when the Leninists go into the Ukraine, after World War, we're in the middle and at the end of World War I, and then subsequently thereafter, they implement this philosophy. They gain power. They kill the Tsar, right? Killed the Tsar and his ministers. Anastasia screamed of hate. Don't know that one? Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. Pleased to meet you. Won't you guess my name, huh? That's the Stones. It's the devil speaking. And he says, remember how it begins? We'll get back to this in a second. It begins, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. I've been around for a long, long year, sold many a man's soul to waste. I was around when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain, made damn sure that Pilate washed his hands and sealed his fate. Pleased to meet you. Won't you guess my name? Yeah, exactly. That came on the radio when I was driving to seminary. First song. And then the second verse, that's a personal story. Happened to me. That song kind of grosses me out. But the second verse says, stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was a time for a change. This is the Marxists. Killed the Tsar and his ministers. Anastasia screamed of age. I rode a tank in the general's rank when the blitzkrieg raged in the finest day. Pleased to meet you. Won't you guess my name? It's Satan. It's the devil. So this philosophy goes into the Ukraine, and the Leninists say there was a group of people that were called, how many of you heard of this group, called the kulaks? They were the farmers. These are the people who managed just to eke out just a minuscule existence of the horrific nature of life in Eastern Europe in that time. Life was horror. Absolutely horrific, which most life has been for most people for pretty much everywhere on the face of the earth for the last thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years until like the last 50. Think about that. And we live in this society where it's like, good night. Think about it. It's only in the last 200 years where people actually vote for their leaders. 99.9% of people lived under bloodthirsty, tyrannical thugs over the face of the earth for the last thousands upon thousands of years. And we live in the one society where supposedly, right, there's some sort of equality and we hate it. It's crazy. It's absolute craziness. So the Leninists say, these people, these farmers, they weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination. They're the ones who have been stealing and exploiting you and keeping you down to the people, who were so-called oppressed. And so you know what they did? The Leninists said, rise up, take what is properly yours. These are the exploiters. So you know what they did? They raped, they pillaged, and they murdered these people. And as a result, you kill the farmers, famine breaks out in Ukraine to the tune of 6 million people starving to death. There you go. There's the philosophy in action.
How long ago was that?
In the 1920s.
That close to us. Wow.
Flip your sheet over. Oh, so let me tell you what happens with the postmodernists. So they wed themselves to Marxism. Look at the bottom of the back of your sheet, Jacques Derrida. He says, deconstruction never had any meaning or interest, at least in my eyes, than as radicalization. That is to say, also within the tradition of a certain Marxism in a spirit of Marxism. He admits it. The architect of the killing, are you guys familiar with the killing fields in Cambodia? The chief architect for the killing fields estimated how many did they kill? Over 10 to 20 million? We don't know, but we know it's in the tens of millions. And like, you know how I like to say, when you're arguing in the tens of millions that they murdered, I think the point is made that it was bad. When your argument is, no, it wasn't 30, it was 20 million. Oh, right, it's a holy and righteous cause now. Got his PhD in France at the Sorbonne. Went back to Cambodia and instituted the killing fields of mass extermination and murder like you wouldn't believe. This is what you'll always get every time this philosophy, wedded with Marxism, has gained ascendancy and has gained power. There's nothing. You either get imprisoned, you get worked to death, or both, or you get murdered. That's how. And you know, we'd had no idea this stuff was going on until a wonderful man who was imprisoned in the Soviet gulags. His name was Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Have you heard of this guy's name? He wrote a groundbreaking work called, and it's really long, and I read it a long time ago, called the Gulag Archipelago. And he was in one of the, what's an archipelago? It's an island chain, right? What's a gulag? It's like a concentration camp. And Stalin had these gulags set up all around the Soviet Union like an island chain of concentration camps. He got stuck into one. Estimated Stalin killed 20 million people. Solzhenitsyn got put into one of these, wrote the Pulitzer Prize winning The Gulag Archipelago. People in the Western world read it and were shocked because we had no idea what was going on behind the wall. No idea. While the same philosophy that has murdered people is being espoused in universities all over the United States, especially in the humanities department. So you'd say, well, that wasn't real socialism, that wasn't real communism. Oh, okay, we got to look to Cambodia. Oh, no, can't do that, where that was implemented. How about Vietnam? No, you can't look to that. Gotcha. How about Mao in China? That's a good one. Oh, yeah, worse than Stalin. Okay. How about Cuba? Don't look there. It's brutal. Venezuela, gosh, they can't even buy toilet paper. Everywhere this poison lands itself, you have murder, you have tyranny, you have poverty, and you have everyone at each other's throats. I think it's safe to say the experiment failed, right? You have a whole century intellectuals did. They saw that the rich versus the poor narrative, because you know what they thought? They thought capitalism was inherently evil. And there's lots of evils about capitalism. You remember what, who was it, Churchill? Was it Winston Churchill? Who said that capitalism's the worst economic system on the face of the earth, except for every other system. There's plenty to decry about capitalism, especially when capitalism is disengaged from the morality of God. Yeah, then you got stuff to worry about, you know. But what had happened with these guys in the 60s, these postmodern demonically possessed devils, is they saw that, oh my gosh, they thought that capitalism would make the poor poorer and the rich richer so that the poor would rise up, right, and create a revolution over those. The have-nots would rise up and take over the haves because they thought capitalism made the poor poorer and the rich richer. What they didn't anticipate, especially in the West, especially like in the United States, is that we still have relative poverty, right? But we saw that the vast majority of people by free market enterprise, got lifted out of poverty in staggering ways that the world had not seen up until that point. We still have poverty, I'm not saying that. And as a matter of fact, it's lifted almost all of Western culture. They didn't see that one coming. And so you know what they did? They looked at where Marxism had been implemented all across the world and saw the body count. The jig is up. What do you do now? The philosophy has led to more death. It beat Hitler by a factor of 20. What do you do with that? Well, what's a sleight of hand in a card trick? What's that? What's a sleight of hand? You switch hands when no one's looking. It's sort of a trick. Maybe it isn't the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. Maybe it isn't the rich versus the poor. Maybe it's oppressor against oppressed. Now, there's not to say that there's lots of oppression, to be sure. But everything is about one power group powering over another. This is general Marxist philosophy. And to be sure, that happens in history, you know? But usually, you guys, if you take a look in history at tyrannies, how long do tyrannies last? They typically don't last long. Why not? Because people don't like living under tyranny. It tends not to work. You could look at some of the most look at the tyrannical regimes of the 20th century. How long did Hitler last? 12 years. How long did the Soviet Union last? It came down in 1989 and it was dead long before that. You know, those are totalitarian regimes. There's authoritarian regimes too, which would be like what China is now. Under Mao, it was totalitarian. But it typically, think about friendship. How does tyranny work in friendships? Why, Sue?
Well, you get fed up.
Yeah, I don't want you to be my friend. Right. Typically, things that last are governments or relationships that are built upon competence, not on tyranny. Tyrannies are short-lived, and you know where I've read some psychological literature on this? I was just doing this last week because I'm stupid and weird, but with chimpanzees. Very interesting. Do you know the chimpanzees that exert tyrannical control over their tribe or over their local group? Typically, do you know what happens? Some of the beta chimpanzees conspire together and kill him. It doesn't last long. And the chimpanzees that stay at the top of the hierarchy are the ones that are cooperative with others. And they work for a common good. It's very interesting. DeWall, if you want to read about it, the guy's name is, I think this is his name, DeWall. He's a primatologist, DeWall. Point being is that this philosophy, which riddled the 20th century with corpses, is not gone, right? You'll see, look here, this is Stephen Hicks on the back here of your sheet. Yeah, look at the top, the second one. He says, in postmodern discourse, truth is rejected explicitly and consistency could be a rare phenomenon. Consider the following pair of claims. On the one hand, all truth is relative. On the other hand, postmodernism tells it like it really is. Wait a minute, if all truth is relative, and you just told me that all truth is relative, isn't that relative? You see the point? This is C.S. Lewis. Go read his essay called Relativizing the Relativizers. On the one hand, all cultures are equally deserving of respect. On the other, Western culture is uniquely destructive and bad. Do you remember the example I gave you of the gal who was winning the Oscar and she said, I don't believe in God and I don't necessarily, essentially she said, I don't believe in right and wrong and this and that, but Western culture is bad. It's like, but you just said there is no such thing. But to the postmodernists, you guys see, incoherence doesn't matter because there is no such thing as ultimate truth. The only thing there is power. And you go get the damn power. And you exert it tyrannically, and it doesn't matter if you have to lie, if you have to cheat, if you have to steal, if you have to spin. It doesn't matter so long as you are in charge and in power.
And if there's no God, you don't have,
What does it matter?
you don't have a price to pay at the end.
The Ubermensch.
The Ubermensch.
There you have your overman.
What did you just say?
The overman, Nietzsche's Superman. Listen to this. Values are subjective. Do you see where I am? Values are subjective, but sexism and racism are really evil. Which Where does this person get the right to say that? Technology is bad and destructive, and it's unfair that some people have more technology than others. Tolerance is good, and dominance is bad. But when postmodernists come to power, political correctness follows. There is a common pattern here: subjectivism and relativism in one breath, dogmatic absolutism in the next. Don't you wonder where you see our politicians and they decry social injustice on a grand scale and will rail at Dan Shaw for driving a truck and then go hop in a damn private jet and fly halfway around the world? Don't you wonder about that? Doesn't anyone wonder about that? Where our Secretary of Transportation does that and yells at me for my truck. And did you know 1 hour, 50 minutes in a private jet equals more pollutants into the environment than me driving my truck for a year? 1 hour. These people go to global warming conferences and they all fly private jets. Hop on a commercial flight. I think if you have someone who's a global warming activist, and I'm saying there's nothing wrong with caring for the planet, but those people that are chiding everyone else about being a global warming activist, they shouldn't get within a damn 10 yards of a private jet. Because it's just blatant hypocrisy on a level that is almost so staggering that it requires miracle. Look at, he says, postmodernists are well aware of the contradictions, especially since their opponents relish pointing them out to them at every opportunity, which I just did. And of course, a postmodernist can respond dismissingly by citing Hegel. Those are merely Aristotelian logical contradictions, but it is one thing to say that and quite another to sustain Hegelian contradictions psychologically. In other words, he's saying it's one thing to say, well, truth doesn't matter, but living as if it does. Anyway, you get the gist. Look at the second to last paragraph. As it became impossible to believe in the morality of the Soviet Union, a shrinking contingent of true believers shifted their devotions. First to communist China under Mao, but then came the revelations of even worse horrors in China in the 60s, including 30 million. Hitler did 6 million in 4. How about 30 million in 2? Do you... I'll talk to my Bellarmine boys in high school. I'd say, have you ever heard of the kulaks? Have you ever heard of what Mao did or the killing fields? Nope. Do you know about the Holocaust? Oh yeah. You don't know about Mao Zedong in China between 1959 and 61? Marxist ideology, postmodernist? Nope. That's because you know what they're really after is the educational system. I'm telling you, because the educational system now, in intellectual resources and critical thinking, it's about creating a social identity for a kid. Deadly. Then Cuba was the great hope. Then Vietnam. Then Cambodia. Then Albania, while in the late 70s. And then Nicaragua in the 80s. But the data and the disappointments piled up, all dealing a solid and devastating blow to socialism's ability to claim a moral sanction. You want to read the book? Stephen Hicks, Postmodernism. Last thing I'll say, Nietzsche. Like I said, Nietzsche birthed this, but he wouldn't necessarily be in favor of the postmodernists or the Marxists. You see what I'm saying? He's the one who said, you yanked out the foundation, what are you going to replace it with? And he knew that when you yank out the foundation, do you know what people are going to be prone to? I said it last week, political ideology. Why? Because everything is uncertain. The ground is moving beneath us. We got to find some stability, and they'll latch on to an extreme ideology. Why do you think Hitler gained ascendancy in Germany in the 30s? Why? Why did a nutbag, a failed Austrian art school student, why did he gain ascendancy? The ground was so unstable. How many of you seen the movie? Here, I'll give you a good movie to watch on this stuff. Batman. The Dark Knight. Have you seen this one? With the Joker, have you seen this? Batman, The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan? Do you remember when Alfred was explaining the Joker? The Joker is Nietzsche. The Joker is the nihilist. He's the ultimate villain in all, not the Marvel world, but he's the ultimate villain in all of these superhero worlds. He's the ultimate villain. Lex Luthor, what did Lex Luthor want? Power, money, prestige. What does the Penguin want? Money, power, prestige. You could go through all the arch villains, and they're after something. What is the Joker after? Pure chaos and evil. Remember, even in the movie, he had a pile of money in the movie, and he says to the one criminal in Gotham, he says, all you guys, he goes, all you want is money. He says, Gotham deserves a better class of criminal, and I'm going to give it to him. And he takes this pile of money that's piled higher than the ceiling, Doc, and he lights it on fire. He doesn't even want it. And this is where Batman can't understand that he's dealing with nihilism. Nihilism. He can't get it. He says, the criminal mind is simple, Alfred. Right? They want certain things. They want power. They want money. They want sex. They want, And you don't need to think this out, Batman says. Bruce Wayne says. And Alfred says, maybe you haven't thought this out, sir. He says, when I was in the Philippines with the British Army, he says, there was a local terrorist insurgent thief, and he would go around stealing all the rubies, all the jewels. And we couldn't catch him, couldn't find him. Couldn't catch him, couldn't find him. He says until one day we were driving down the road, and we saw this little Filipino boy playing with a ruby the size of a softball on the side of the road. Turns out he would steal them all, create chaos, and just throw them away. Batman says, Bruce Wayne says, why would he do that? Alfred says, I don't know. He goes, because it was fun, because it was good sport. And he says, some men can't be bought, bullied, or bartered with. Some men just want to see the world burn. That's the joke. There you have it. That's deconstructionism. Some people, you go try and engage in a logical discussion with a postmodernist. They won't have it because language is merely a power game that's a part of the Western tyrannical patriarchy, and you're just using language to oppress me more and more and more and more and more. There is no dialogue, and the root word of dialogue is the Greek word logos, which is the name of Jesus Christ in John chapter 1. There is no logic. There is no logos. It's pathological right to its core. And it's amazing. Do you know in college humanity departments, I bet you know this, 1 out of every 5 humanities professor in colleges in the United States identifies themselves as a Marxist. If 1 out of every 5 professors in the college would identify themselves as a Nazi, what would you say? It's horrible! We'd flip out. The Marxists blow Hitler away. Not even close in the evil and the magnitude of the scale of it. So, we got 5 minutes left. How do you approach this from a biblical worldview? I just want to make sure, and maybe I'm overdoing it, Doc. I just want to make sure we know what we're up against. You know what I'm saying? I want to make sure that we have a full foundational understanding of what we're facing. And how do you dialogue with this? How do you evangelize this? How do you bring the gospel to this? Part of me, I don't know. I don't know. How do you have logos, a dialogos, dia Greek, which means through logic. We work through logic. That's what dialogue means. How do you have dialogue with someone that says words, even words, are power games that you're playing on me? What do you do with that? And it's just one group fighting another group. What do you do? I don't know. There's a great book called Disruptive Witness. The guy's a professor down at Baylor. And he said this culture is secular postmodern, this culture. Here, I'll give you a great book to read on this. This gal, Mary Eberhardt, Eberstadt, she's a senior researcher at the Faith and Reason Institute in Washington, D.C. This is her book called Primal Screams. Listen to what she says. It's not funny, but it's sad. She says, accordingly, she says, in our country, the unrelenting focus on identity That's all you hear about. It doesn't matter what your biology is. You could say whether you're a man or a woman. That's demonic. I don't even... The unrelenting focus on identity infantilizes the polity, substitutes victimhood for citizenship, and subverts responsible self-government by turning e pluribus unum on its head. What is e pluribus unum? They want to make it out of the one many. Not out of the many one, out of the one there's many. Tribalism. See what I'm saying? She concludes this. It's real interesting. Yeah. I want to get back to scripturally, which is why you guys, the only answer that I know before we go is you have to stay centered on an objective, solid, foundational norm. And this is your Bible. Specifically that first session where we talked about what does it mean to have a biblical worldview. How we're centered on the death and the resurrection of Jesus. On how we live as people of the cross and people of the resurrected Jesus. We ultimately know that this is from the pit of hell in my estimation. You may not, maybe that's an hyperbole, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But we know what this is. We have to be centered here first. And on who Jesus is and what he has done. That is our foundation. The church, Christians cannot deviate. There's never been a time probably in our country's history where we need this more. The Baylor professor, I can't remember his name. He says we live in a postmodern secular culture. He says it's secular. It's not only postmodern, it's post-Christian. What does that mean? Oh yeah, Christianity, been there, done that. You know who didn't even have to deal with that? The apostles didn't have to deal with that. Post-Christian, they never had to deal with that. The gospel was new in the Mediterranean world, right? You could go out to people, right? Been there, done that. Yep, God's stupid. Genesis is fake. All that stuff. So it's postmodern secular. It's post-Christian, and it's distracted. What is distracted? This is how people live now. I hate it. I see it in my kids too. I hate it. And I see it in myself. You live like this. That's how we live. So you're distracted. When you're distracted like this, and it's just, I need new stimulus, I need new stimulus, I need new stimulus, I need new stimulus. How does the gospel work? Because the gospel of Jesus Christ requires you to go deep. You know, I give the example of watching cable news. Do any of you ever watch cable news? So you not only have the news, you're watching the news, or the so-called news, the fake news. You know, you're watching it. I'm joking. I could just do that voice really well, is why I do it. You're not only watching the news, but they're switching angles. Watch this. Probably every 5 to 10 seconds. Because it's boop, 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 boop. Why? Because we know that if the American attention span right now is about 5 to 10 seconds. We can't hold. And not only that, you're getting the news, you're watching the different angles. There's also a ribbon going at the bottom of the screen, which is telling you other news. And then there's a ribbon below the ribbon that's telling you what the stock market is doing. And then there's what time it is over there, and it switches between Eastern and Central and Mountain and Western time. And it's going, we're distracted, which is why we can never go deep with anything. No one answers the question anymore of like, what would you live or die for? People don't ask those questions anymore. It was recently shown that the next generation, what's the generation? Gen Z. It was something like 65% of Gen Z respondents said they would never, under any circumstances, ever join the military and fight for their country.
Why? Is there a reason?
Yeah, I'll tell you the reason. It's right here, Dixie.
That's it.
It's corrupt to its core. No, it's just a product. It's just a Western tyrannical patriarchy. Why would you go fight for that? It's corrupt anyway. While they live, that's another. Hey, I'll share this with you. That's another characteristic of postmodern Marxists. You know what it is? They're unbelievably ungrateful. That's a sign. I was watching an interview with Jordan Peterson, and I think probably one of the smartest guy on the planet right now. And he was speaking to a lady interviewing him from I think it was GQ, and she's espousing this stuff like you wouldn't believe. And he talked about being ungrateful, and she goes, "What's ungrateful?" And he looks at her, he goes, "Look at what you have." She goes, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I don't know. Considering all the people that have ever lived on earth, you're in the top 1/4% in terms of wealth and luxury than anyone has ever experienced on the history of the planet. You're in the top 99.9 percentile. You ever think of that?" Well, she goes, "Well, I still think there's lots of good things that I could get from, even though I'm against the Western patriarchy, there's lots of things that, that I've benefited from." And he goes, "Well, good." "Yeah." He goes, "Quit." "Well, I don't want to," she says. He goes, "That's a hell of a fine rationalization for you living in the patriarchy and yet, critiquing it." He goes, "Why don't you give your job to someone else less privileged than you?" "Well, no." Okay. Most people, like I said, have lived under bloodthirsty, tyrannical thugs. And I'm just nervous that I don't want our country to turn into an authoritarian, totalitarian, tyrannical place.
Imagine no possessions.
Yeah, there you go. There it is, Doc.
Met a guy with $200 million when he died. It's so easy to say, imagine no possessions when it were 200 million. That's no number. Whose estate's probably worth 600 million now, but it's amazing how you can write these kind of songs.
Or like Leonardo DiCaprio telling you that you need to do X, Y, and Z for the poor and the oppressed in the environment while he flies flies a private jet and lives in a $100 million home. I would listen to you if it wasn't rife with hypocrisy.
His quoting Mick Jagger, Sympathy for the Devil, written in 1968. Now, I'm stunned by that, but I'm going, wow. Now, I would know the song because I've kept repeating it.
The creepiest version is sung by, do you know the group Jane's Addiction?
Yeah.
That's the creepiest version.
But that song really tells you what's going on in 68. That's just, man, it's just the epitome of history. And you can see the devil just in that song just saying, "Hey, glad to meet you." And he even calls himself Lucifer in the song.
The beauty of Western civilization, you guys, is that we figured out that the ultimate thing of value is the individual. That's the beauty of Western culture. It is the individual, not particularly a group or a group of a group or a group. It's an individual. And that's how God looks at people too. St. Augustine said that Jesus Christ died for you as if you were the only person that ever lived on earth. I mean, you're holy and dearly loved by him. So, you guys, the next couple weeks as we close out, I want to start exploring more into how now, given these philosophies, we're done with looking at kind of the enemies of the biblical worldview. I want to start getting into a way of how we engage. Let me get my Nietzsche quote before we go. This is a great one to get the basic writings of Nietzsche by Walter Kaufmann. He's a top-notch Nietzsche scholar and Kierkegaard scholar, too. Another one of my favorites, Soren Kierkegaard was called the melancholy Dane. He was Danish. What does melancholy mean? Depressed, because he's always like chastising Anyway. Looking at what was coming with this stuff, this is what Nietzsche said. You're going to build, like the kulaks, what they endured, and the Marxists, he says, you're going to build a lot of people you're going to function off resentment. And he says this, these are all going to be men of resentment, physiologically unfortunate and worm-eaten, a whole tremulous realm of subterranean revenge, inexhaustible and insatiable in outbursts against the fortunate and the happy, and in masquerades of revenge and pretext for revenge. When would they achieve the ultimate subtlest, sublimest triumph of revenge? Undoubtedly, if they succeed in poisoning the conscience of the fortunate with their own misery. With all misery, so that one day the fortunate began to be ashamed of their good fortune and perhaps said to one another, "It is disgraceful to be fortunate. There is too much misery." And he says, and they will hit you with soliloquies of virtue all over the place, but not extra. I'll tell you a crazy story about that. Before we go, last one, promise. Socrates. Have you ever read Plato's Republic? It's worth reading. The postmodernists hate Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, but that's a whole other thing. Socrates goes to his friend Glaucon. Now, we don't know whether Socrates was real in these things or he's just Plato's invention, right? Plato, not Play-Doh. That's what my dad would say. Plato? You read about him on Goggle? Socrates goes to his friend Glaucon. I love this story. And he poses a little, we were talking about Socrates. How does Socrates teach? By asking questions, right? So Socrates says to his friend Glaucon, let me pose a little thought experiment. He said, what would happen if a perfectly unjust, evil man came into our midst? Glaucon said, we would hail him as king. We would lift him up. We would say he's the righteous of all righteous. He's wonderful. He's good and noble and virtuous. Socrates says, well, then I got another question for my little thought experiment. What would happen if a perfectly righteous man came into our midst? Glaucon says, first it would be the rack. Then hot branding irons in the eyes. He says, and then as a final act of humiliation, we would hoist him upon the cross. And then Socrates answers Glaucon. He says, interesting, have we really come to that? That it is more important to appear righteous. So, you know, the early Christians had a field day with that section of the Republic. Take a perfectly righteous man, and what would we do with him? We'd beat him, we'd scourge him, we'd tear his eyes. Like my teacher Ferdy said, what does that say about us? Huh? That when people always say, Dan, I can't be a Christian because look at what I've done. I've done this, I've done that. I'm just a horrible person. I said, God, you got nothing on me. Look at when God came into our midst, incarnate in Jesus Christ, I threw him up on the cross and beat the nails into his hands. I'm a raging, homicidal, deicidal maniac. I murdered God, right? Not in the Nietzschean sense. You know, Jesus Christ was up there for Dan's sins and yours, not for himself. So that means I put him there. So if you think you're bad, I could trump you. When Jesus Christ came to me and offered me himself, I said, crucify him. That's why I love at the old Good Friday service we used to have at our church where you'd read the Passion narrative and Pilate asks, what should I do then with your king? And it was the response. The church had to say this. All 200 people sitting in the pews, they would take the roll of the crowd and they would yell, crucify him, kill him. And we think that's, oh, that's so sad. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Yes, we were. And we were yelling, crucify him.
Did your church really do that, yelling?
I think you were there.
I must have my ears plugged.
But you get the point. Remember, guys, when you see Jesus Christ on the cross, go read a great essay by Luther called A Meditation on Christ's Passion, 1525. And he said, when you see Jesus Christ on the cross, know that that's your work. We did that. We did that. He's not there for himself. He's there for Dixie. He's there for Bruce. He's there for Dan. He's there for Jerry. That everything that we are, that's why he's there. We did that. That's our handiwork. Luther would say that's what free will's good for. What a beautiful thing your free will has concocted and created. You murdered Jesus. But then, you know what Ferdy says to conclude? He says, and look at Peter's sermon in Acts 2. Do you remember what he says in Acts 2? His first Christian sermon. Do you remember? Here's the gist of it. You killed Christ. The Father raised him. In other words, we had everything to do with the crucifixion and nothing to do with the resurrection. And so now we try and get God out of our life. We tried to get him out in Genesis 3 and all through the book of Judges, and I mean, on and on and on. We're trying to push him away, push him away, push him away, and finally when he comes into our midst, sick of sending prophet, priest, and king, we murder him, and then God raises him from the dead and says, well, we tried to push God away by killing him, and now the Bible says that he will never die again when he was raised from the dead. Now what do you do with Jesus? You can't kill him anymore, and he's the eternal reigning king of all, and there's nothing that you could do. The only thing left for you to do is what? Bend the knee. That's why C.S. Lewis said when he converted, he says, I felt like Jesus Christ said to me, put down your gun and we'll talk. I was in open rebellion. I love that. Put down your gun and we'll talk. Okay, thank you, Lord, for this time. We're excited, Lord, next week where we're not going to talk philosophy anymore. Thank you, Father. We're going to talk about your will for this world that at one point you called good, and we know that you love this world because you sent your Son into this world to die for all of us and to be raised again, and that it is your will that all men and all women should come to the knowledge and come to salvation. Not just us in the church, but all people come to knowledge of your salvation. Every set of eyes that we see when we leave here is a set of eyes that your Son bled and died for, Lord. And so give us wisdom, give us strategy, give us insight according to your word, not according to our minds, but according to your word on how we could be your instruments of in this world, Lord. Make us your instruments. Make us channels of your peace. In Jesus' name, amen.